it is supposed to be fun and informal and relaxed, even though I think the topic this week is relatively intense. So we're going to try to fine line and see if we can make it work. Hopefully we can. So here's the deal. Each week we choose a topic of relevance and go through it. This week we've chosen self-isolation, how to come out stronger. So make what you will of that. And we've got 3 speakers to help us. Now, our mission at Grey Consulting is to slay the monsters that keep clients up at night. Monsters like business disruption, to marketing transformation, culture change. And usually these monsters appear whenever new realities crash into old thinking and old habits. And right now, I think we're dealing with one of the biggest monsters we've ever dealt with, aren't we? And of course, it might be out there in the outside world, but it might equally well be in here at the moment, I think, and how we're feeling and dealing with the challenge of being in self-isolation and in quarantine. So let's try and see if we can slay some of those monsters tonight. Our guest speakers, we have 3 guest speakers tonight, drawn from, I guess, the worlds of psychology, from coaching, from psychotherapy, from leadership development. So, you know, quite a specialist and a hardcore bunch of individuals. I'll let them introduce themselves to you in a minute. They've certainly got between them more acronyms after their names and more kind of academic credits than any of our speakers in previous events. So I'm excited to see what we can pull off with this, really. But what we're going to do together really is discover, reflect a bit on how do we react to uncertainty? What does it do to how we think and act? What sort of coping mechanisms might there be for us to help us, and could we use them immediately? And what sort of tools could we discover, or ways could we discover to come out stronger when self-isolation ends? And I know it's a tough topic, but if we can find some fun and humor in it, then so much the better. So I'm going to introduce the speakers to you, and then I'll ask them a bunch of questions, which you guys can listen into. And then we're going to ask offer the chance for you guys to ask questions too. We are recording this show. So I love the fact this turned into a TV show live from Wimbledon Loft Studios. We're going to record the show, but so if you are called on, if you want to ask a question and you don't want your face to be on screen, let's make sure you turn off your camera and you can do an audio one only if you like. Okay, so look, let's get into it. Why don't we start with Rebecca? We'll start with you, if we can get you on. So, Rebecca, what I'd like to do is get you to tell us a bit about yourself, and how would your friends describe you? And hopefully we can. You're on mute at the moment, but hopefully we can make sure you're not on mute. I've got Rebecca on mute. Maybe Nick, you can see if we can take her off. How's that, Rebecca?
Right, great. Hi, thanks for having me. How fun to be on your show. Nice. I actually have a glass of wine here. You did say, like, grab a glass of wine, so I took your word. So I am an organisational psychologist. I spend half of my time in the academic world. So I lecture in management practice at the London School of Economics, amongst other things, writing and stuff, and researching. And then the other half of my time as the CEO of Coach Advisor, so and coaching and consulting business, where we really help leaders and professionals to be the very best that they can, to lead through change well, to lead through uncertainty, all the things that we're facing now. Our goal is really to help leaders be the best they can, create strong teams and healthy cultures to achieve what it is they're trying to do. And so that's me.
And how would your friends describe you? How would my friends
describe me? Well, obviously I'm Australian. After 20 years in England, I thought I'd have a posh Emma Thompson accent, but no, it stays. Loud, probably. I mean, I think one of your shows should be how to be an extrovert in your house all the time without your friends. Yeah, hopefully fun. You know, I love what we do, and I love research and the kind of serious side of work, but I also, you know, I love what you're doing here, which is talking about really serious things, but also trying to keep it lighthearted and a bit fun. I think we all need that right now. So
lovely. Thank you.
That's me.
Much. Okay. Belinda Rydings, are you there?
I'm right here. Yes.
Tell us a bit about yourself, Belinda.
It's great to be here. Lovely to see people and connect this way. Really helpful in these times. So I'm Belinda Rydings. I'm a psychologist, a coach, and a trauma therapist. I'm an absolute newcomer to compliant behaviour.
What does that mean?
Well, in regard to just keeping up my distance and not going out and stuff. So this is. I'm generally a bit of a rebel, but I can see that this
wouldn't describe you as a compliant.
Yeah, so this is new for me. Other than that, online yoga convert, I suppose, and bit of a late night armchair sleuth.
That sounds really interesting. That sounds amazing. What does that mean? Are you going to
just watch too much Netflix, really. That's what it means. I'm trying to make it sound highbrow.
You did it. You nailed it. Richard, what about you? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi. My name is Richard Jenkins. I'm a psychotherapist. Here's my couch. You thought I was in the spare room. This is my psychoanalytic couch. I teach on some psychotherapy courses, trainees. I also work quite closely with charities. I've had a long history in the kind of around policy and research and strategy around charity sector, from government all the way through to funders. Just in the mix, because I haven't done enough this week, I have been an Anglican priest for about 25 years now. So it's a kind of mix of the sacred and the secular. That's what I try and do in my life.
And you're still a practicing, can you be a practicing, but you're still an active priest then, are you?
I'm still practicing. I still haven't got it right. I don't think I've got anything right, actually. I'm not doing like live on the stream masses. There was a lovely one. Did anyone get the meme of the Italian priest? He had turned on filters. So he was getting all sorts of crazy things on his head. I love that. But yeah, no, I was trying to keep this sort of between Freud and scripture. I've got a kind of nice mix of the sacred and the sex obsessed, I think.
Very nice. All right. So should we get into the questions and then we can crack on? Hopefully everyone can hear and you're all kind of tuned in. So look, I think we'll do it first. Maybe we'll start with you, Richard, since you're on screen. I was we're gonna talk about how we're all dealing with uncertainty, but I thought I'd make it more personal, really, and maybe you could tell us a bit about how do you react to uncertainty generally? How does it sort of manifest in your life, and how do you deal with it?
Well, it's interesting you say that. The last few weeks have been incredibly interesting about uncertainty. I was on a call with someone today who was saying, it's a real mix of sort of vulnerability and resilience. And I was really struck by that, having to dig deep. I tend actually to catastrophize a bit. I'm from Belfast, so I've got this inner Ulster Puritan who's going around with a big sign, not only saying the end is nigh, but also saying it's an enormous plot that's been cooked up by the Illuminati. So I don't know if anyone else has gone into conspiracy kind of vortexes, but honestly, to say that I've really noticed that for myself and also for other people, kind of going into psychological lockdown sometimes getting really quite energized by it. So actually getting very strategic and very thoughtful, that's the sort of the other side, I think, of intuition gone mad. Intuition gone mad is paranoia. Intuition gone the good side is I can see a brave new world and how to navigate my way into it. And I think maybe what also happens for all of us with uncertainty is that all the normal anchors have been taken away and we're kind of pulled back on our vulnerabilities. And in a way, our kind of favorite psychological complexes get activated. So that's my inner Ulster Protestant going out and saying the end is not. So on the plus side, it's a great chance for a bit more self-knowledge, I think, in these times.
Yeah.
But riding the waves. So I think for me, uncertainty feels like choppy waters, and I definitely ride the waves on it.
That's really interesting you say the waves. I think that's something which many of us have sort of talked about. Rebecca, what about you? Like, how do you, I don't know how much of that, what Rich said chimes for you, but how do you experience uncertainty and react to it yourself?
yeah, gosh, when he said about, I'm not sure what quite the word was, but something about panicking, I thought, oh, I could would get along well. I'm really mindful, you know, like a lot of my work and research is in change and uncertainty. And so I'm, you know, I think I should probably be better equipped to handle it than I do maybe. But I'm mindful that, you know, the neuroscientists would tell us that uncertainty triggers in our brain as an error message. So, you know, like the printer not working, an icon bobbing up and down, error, 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 until it's kind of resolved. And I'm always mindful of that. That really helps me in a way, just to know that it's not me, but as people, we're wired to want certainty. And so that's different to whether we're change oriented or not. So we'll often talk about, you know, do people like change? Do they drive change, or are they not as highly oriented towards change? Uncertainty is different, because that's something that, you know, where we talk about wanting change, that's to some degree within our control. So uncertainty in its nature is outside of our control. And, you know, it helps me to remember that as people, we're wired to want certainty. So things like, you know, even with thinking about lockdown, if we knew, okay, this is going to end in exactly 3 weeks, then we'd probably all just get on with it. And so, and that would reflect in business, that would reflect in the markets, things like that. And even personally we'd cope with that. Or if equally we knew, okay, it's going to end, lockdown's going to end, I mean, even if we could hypothetically think about knowing when this season of COVID-19 would be over, but if we knew lockdown was going to end in 3 months' time, then, okay, that might be more difficult for various reasons for different people, but still we would have that sense of, okay, I just have to get to the 3-month mark. And of course we don't have that, and we can't have that knowledge, you know, right now. So one thing that I think helps me is just thinking about kind of micro seasons. So, okay, it's April now. What can I do within April? So I do try and take control to whatever degree I can, and I get pretty busy trying to take control of anything I can take control of, which probably drives my husband crazy. But and then I'm not too bad at letting go of stuff that I can't control. I think, well, I'm just doing my best here. So, but yeah, it does help me to break down the window. So I kind of think, okay, to the end of April, here's what we're going to focus on as a business, or here's what I'm going to focus on, or we're going to look at as a family. And then we revisit at that point and go from there.
Like a kind of form of chunking, I suppose. That's kind of interesting. Yeah. I love that. Belinda, what about you? So talk to me about how do you react to uncertainty generally?
Yeah, sure. In general, I really liked what Richard said about riding a wave. I like the choppiness of that image. And Rebecca's saying we like an end point. That helps us enormously. So for me, I've made it a practice for, I suppose, the last 10 years or so to follow a more kind of emergent and Buddhist approach to uncertainty, namely that uncertainty is the only certainty, and trying to be in the present. So rather than planning the future, reflecting on the past. So that's, I think, a helpful approach for me. And frankly, any attempt to convince ourselves that our plans are going to come to fruition the way that we hoped is basically a bit of an illusion. That said, you know, it is a practice. I'm not yet that good at it, and this is the kind of ideal or ultimate scenario, isn't it, to test our responses to uncertainty. To be honest, I failed quite early on, probably due to my over focus on newsfeed. I think that was problematic for me. I did feel a lot of anxiety come up at that early stage, and so that was a lesson for me. And I've been taking things in my stride a lot more and accepting the limitations of the situation for me. So I think to help with that acceptance, I remind myself that this is out of my control, and being is a more sustainable approach than trying to do something because this is a long-term endeavor, I feel. And
sorry,
yeah.
go on.
I was just going to say, contextually, I think my problems are pretty minimal in the scheme of things, so that helps keep me quite grounded as well. Yeah.
I heard on the news, I think it was yesterday, that people were reporting having vivid dreams about COVID-19, which I guess is because they're living this situation and they're busy absorbing all kinds of stimuli through the news and other things every day. So they have different ways of dealing with it. It's one thing to talk about how we personally experience that uncertainty and how we might respond to it. Are there any kind of, are there ways that you typically normally see people respond to uncertainty when you in your professional roles are looking either at individuals or organisations or teams or communities even? What sort of things might you expect to observe in others? Any of you can go.
Well, I think it is, we regress to defaults in the face of new, unfamiliar situations, partly as a way, I think, of trying to comprehend them, and partly as a way of trying to go to a safe space. And that's sort of mirrored in just almost the way in which the body tenses up. We kind of psychologically tense up as well. And that was just really lovely, Belinda, the way you talked about how you've come out of that sort of tensing up in relation to the news feed and so on, until we gradually begin to soften and become a little bit more pliant and able to go with something and to allow it to take us along with it. But I think it's that sort of reverting to old patterns, old ways of thinking, old algorithms, if you like, to try and interpret a very unfamiliar and changing situation. And I'm completely with you, Belinda, on the emergent stuff. This is an absolute lesson for all of us in how to deal with complexity. And I've been finding in the organisational work I do recently, complexity theory incredibly helpful. And some research that I'm kind of helping to sort of support brings us back to kind of three things, which is all about adaptation, staying human, so really staying with our own humanity. And partly that, I think, is trying to come back to what you're saying about being grounded and not being overly heroic. Learning, so that's the opposite pole of knowing. So actually to really let go of knowing stuff. Those old algorithms are not going to work. New ones need to come in. And then just being in touch with the system, which I think in a really local way is just the network. And this is a fantastic example here of what that means. Suddenly we're reaching out and we're connecting systemically with other parts of the ecosystem that we haven't reached before, in order to just get fantastic feedback, intelligence, encouragement, support, mirroring, warmth, connection from the system, and a new system comes into play. So once we begin to soften up and get into that mode, I think then we can begin to go with it. Yeah,
I was very struck by you saying like staying human and not becoming overly heroic. Is that like this is to anyone really, but is that like a typical, is to try and take on a heroic stance a typical response? I did read something from the my trade press today about leaders stepping up, which felt like a big bit of bombastic heroism being put forward. Is that a thing we tend to see?
It's a big temptation. I've seen it in just the individuals I work with, never mind the chief execs of organisations I've seen as well. I don't know, I'd love to hear from Rebecca and Belinda if they see that also.
I'm not sure. I think a lot of us have spent half our lives planning for a crisis. So in that sense, yes, hey, this is our time. Heroic, I don't know, that isn't a word that I've kind of, that's come to me. It's interesting.
I'm going to open the bottle. What do you mean by planning for a crisis, as in we spend our lives preparing for the worst outcome?
I think it's quite a natural human response. Rebecca was alluding to the neuroscience, and the scientists would say that the human brain is basically like a great big processor for categorizing and planning. And we like to assume that we're creating clarity and certainty out of some kind of chaos of external events and stimuli that really bombard us.
Mm.
But it's an assumption, and it gives us some sense of control and safety in this really unpredictable world. So that's why I think we're quite we have a negativity bias, and we focus on worst case scenarios and make plans. But I don't think anyone really ever expected this one.
No, I did get a sense, I mean, we'll talk about it amongst my immediate team, about whether in the first flush of this isolation there'd been almost a sense of excitement and a thrill of the crisis, which maybe I'm making a connection to whether that was to do with spent so long planning for it that when it finally arrives it's kind of exciting in a sick way. But I guess that's kind of wearing off now for most people. Rebecca, like, you have obviously you understand the individual from a psychological perspective, but also I know you look at teams and groups of people. I mean, is there something which you might observe in a team in terms of how they tend to respond to or react to uncertainty like this?
Yeah, I think the thing that I've been most impressed with is the kindness and the grace that people are having for one another now. And you know, it's interesting what you say about heroism. I don't know that any leader right now, certainly not the ones that I work with, would say that they're trying to be or succeeding at being a hero, but rather just doing the best that they can. But I do think that, you know, in the way that groups are working, I've been really impressed with our client organizations, how, you know, the ones that are navigating this well are really committed to connection and to the social side, and trying to be mindful of the fact that we're all experiencing this differently and in different times. So, you know, like, I don't know, I assume it's not just me, but, you know, some days I can rally, you know, and it's okay, and I'm thankful for things, and I'm determined to make the best of it, and you know, of kind of being in lockdown, I'm really mindful of what I'm thankful for, and you know, recognizing a lot of people are in a much more difficult situation. But other times I'm just, it's awful, you know, and you know, you see the news, like the news tonight, it's just devastating, and it's hard to comprehend what's going on in the world and in our country right now, with just the number of people who are being affected by this. But, you know, from a kind of team's perspective, the thing that I think is so nice is that I'm seeing people are really being intentional with how they connect with one another, you know, working out new ways, checking in, you know, whether it's teams having socials, you know, our team set up tea breaks, you know, we're so used to all just having a cup of tea or coffee together and setting that type of stuff up. But also I think people are being genuinely kinder and more open to real and meaningful conversations and supporting each other. So, you know, to me, it's about like kind of navigating this season from a leadership perspective or from a team's perspective. It's about just showing that kindness and that grace to people, but also, you know, having some disciplines that help keep us healthy, both individually and collectively. I think it's about a balance of, you know, I love Belinda's point around being present in the moment, and that's so important and something that we all need to learn, and actually can be harder in this season in some ways when we're constantly on video conferencing or emails, and just to stay focused on that one thing that we're doing in the moment and to be present. And at the same time, from an organizational perspective, you know, as leaders and teams, we need to be strategic, and there's a lot of just a lot of change coming from the outside in. Most organizations aren't used to quite that degree of outside in driven change that we're facing right now. You know, whole industries are going to shift, and people need to pivot pretty quickly. So to me, it's that balance of being in the moment and thinking, you know, from a business perspective, absolutely thinking making sure that we're being strategic, not just being busy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we have just an advantage point we have of working with different client organisations across different parts of the globe at the moment. In general terms, most companies and teams aren't brilliant at dealing with change, are they? I mean, we spend our lives trying to drive. We're talking about this with the team and with Fern, who's on the call particularly, but spent the last 10 years sort of driving digital transformation and technology uptake in organizations, and it took something significant like this to actually create that change and make it happen. And typically people are quite resistant, I think, because it's quite a lot of friction on the mind, whereas this suddenly we're in a very different place. I mean, I guess we should get into, and I've sort of been on the call for a while now, I'm fascinated by, I feel like it's making me reflect quite a lot deeper than we have done, even though we've been talking about it in our teams. But I guess we should move on to the questions about what sorts of things could we do in terms of helping to handle that uncertainty and the state of mind that arises around it. Because I think I would love it if we were. I'm not asking you to give people free coaching sessions, guys, but I would think it would be interesting both from the speakers, and then maybe we'll open it to the floor later. But what sort of 2 or 3 things can people do if they're not already doing it to make it easier? Maybe Richard, you haven't spoken for, maybe you'd like to go first on that one.
Well, just first of all, I'm so encouraged to hear from people just sort of like batting away the kind of the hero archetype, because it's such a trap to fall into. And I think it's partly what's going on, though, politically. The political rhetoric is saying that people ought to know, they ought to be in charge. Dominic Raab should be blah, 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 blah. And that's all just nonsense. We're all in this together, as you're saying. And so the question, I think, is not just how to survive in uncertainty, but how, in some ways, to be enriched by it. And awful things are happening, but amazing things are happening as well. And so I think, just coming from my perspective, the kind of psychoanalytic theories about the kind of the unconscious, and neuroscience really backs it up, that of course we've got our kind of directed thinking, we've got our great left brain attitude, but kind of right brain modes, creativity is really coming from a deeper unconscious place, and that is a place of being. So actually what I'm doing, it's interesting you said about people having dreams of COVID-19. I'm dreaming a lot at the moment, and that's part of my practice, to record my dreams and to reflect on them, because that's the part, it's, our unconscious is like sort of the liver of the psyche. It's just processing all of the stuff, helping us digest things, sort out what's toxic, what's helpful, really breaking things down to digestible stuff that builds us up psychologically, and to just open the mind to the dreams, to take a dream diary, and if you don't have an analyst, get one. But even just staying with that process, because it's your creativity, that's the change from within. And we know this stuff's coming. We already knew it unconsciously that this was happening. We have been sort of preparing ourselves for it. And the new is going to be birthed below the level of our strategic, ordinary, linear thinking. It is going to be in the complexity. It is going to be in the system. It is going to be in the unconscious. And I think that calls us to really trust that there's an inner process that will allow us to move creatively forward. That's one thing I'm going to offer. Other people have other things, but that's part of my practice, actually, because that's where we connect.
Wow, I might come back to you for some more, Richard. That was really thinking. I'm sort of reverberating around that. I can feel the Carl Jung channeling through you. Somebody, Belinda, perhaps maybe next. What we're looking for sort of. This might go on for 3 or 4 hours, but what sort of useful things could people try in terms of we find ourselves in?
Yeah, I just saw in the chat there's a comment about joining the NHS support line. I think that's really helpful for people who need to be doing something. But for me, handling uncertainty in this context and others, the biggest thing is kindness, and kindness. I don't think we can overstate it. We need to practice compassion for ourselves and for other people. I've experienced quite a lot of reactivity, a whole range of different reactions from friends and from clients, different leaders going into the weeds and not being strategic, as Rebecca was saying, getting busy and just trying to run at it. It's not helpful at all. And then others who are really being very cool and calm and fantastic role models, leading the way. I think some people who are kind of thought leaders who have taken themselves through a transition in their lives are able to see the opportunity here. Obviously, it is discombobulating for everybody. We're seeing and hearing about very traumatic experiences, and it's going to be affecting us economically and socially in terms of our physical and mental health for a long time. But there is an opportunity here for change, and ultimately learning to deal with this kind of uncertainty and our sense of control could be liberating if we can bring a wise and kind, compassionate mind to it.
Amazing. Rebecca, is there something that which you would say, here's a couple of things to try and alleviate how we're feeling right now?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that we can do, in addition to these points, I mean, I could just have sat listening to those previous two for ages. I think something that we could miss in this season is having really meaningful conversations. So obviously, I tend to come at it from a work perspective. All of my kind of space, I'm an organisational psychologist, so I think about kind of leaders and teams and organisations a lot. I think we're creating ways of making sure that we're staying connected and, communicating with people and supporting them to get their work done and things like that. But I think people need to chat. Richard made this point, if you don't have an analyst, get one. Even just from a friend's perspective or from a colleague's perspective or a leader and team member dynamic, I think that we need to try and carve out windows where we have really meaningful conversations and almost kind of one-way conversations. So just checking in and asking people what they're thinking about things, how are they feeling about things, not looking to solve everything for everyone, but just asking good open questions. The research is unbelievable in this field, I think, that shows that what they call coaching with compassion. So this is from Richard Boyatzis from Case Western and some colleagues. They talk about coaching with compassion, that I think is really important for now. So, essentially it's asking open questions, focusing on the other person's goals, on their topic, on their agenda. When we chat with friends, we tend to last a few minutes before we turn it back to our side and back to that, and it's banter, and that's fun though, right? It's different. But I'd encourage particularly leaders or just, people in a work context to carve out even 10 or 15 minutes where you're just staying on that other person's agenda, asking them questions, not trying to solve it, but just kind of coaching them in that open question style with a compassionate lens. And what's amazing about the research is, you'd expect in that the people who on the receiving end of that, who are being coached, are getting benefits from that. They get to chat, they get to process, they get to reflect, they get to reframe, and hopefully that's what people experience when they're coached, whether that's formal coaching or just from a friend or a colleague or a leader. What is amazing in the research is that they show there are psychophysiological changes in the body of the person who's coaching. So when you carve out that space to give that time to someone else and coach them with compassion, there's actually psychological and even physiological changes in our bodies that take place, and those changes directly mitigate what they call power stress, the stress that comes from the responsibility of leading of people and teams and just responsibilities that we have at work. It's unbelievable. So I think that that's one really practical thing that we could do, is just to make sure that we're carving out windows, even just 10 or 15 minutes with people, just to stay focused on their agenda, that coaching with compassion.
That's really interesting, actually. I think that's brilliant. And I one of the it was a chap who's now left the call, unfortunately has to go, but Marco and I had a chat last night, actually, in this, just like this, one-on-one. We would meet up for lunch once or twice a year, and we'd have a coffee now and again, and it was and actually just the ability to have a kind of not work related, not sort of heavyweight social, just chatting about the week, but something in between that's kind of one or the other, just felt like such a release and a real moment of connection, and almost like of renewing the bonds of friendship. It was quite fascinating to experience that. I'm conscious that I have sort of led the conversation, asked the question, dominated, and actually there's a load of really incredibly bright, talented, good-looking, smart and connected people on this call that that might have other things to sort of throw in and say. So I know we are sort of, I'm going to build up to a question at the end around how might we come out stronger from self-isolation, but conscious of people's genius. Is there anyone who wants to sort of ask a question? One way of doing it is you can raise your hand, or you can kind of write. I think the way we like to do it, and my lovely colleague Nick Bennett, who's from Hyper Ireland, who I forgot to mention, but have been facilitating and running this with us for the last couple of weeks, and are good friends and solid allies in helping do remote learning, and they've been doing this sort of stuff for years, way before we all kind of got onto it. So they are the experts. Suggest that you should write, I've got a question in the side. Has anyone got a kind of question they'd like to pose to any of our amazing, talented speakers? Go for it. Not everyone feels happy to do it, but Sebastian, you seem like you're keen. So maybe Sebastian will go first, not my sister, because that would seem like undue preference. So they both are connected to me. Yeah.
I feel like your sister sometimes, Leah. This is not a very fully formed question, but it's for Belinda, because you mentioned that you specialize in sort of trauma. And I was thinking the other day about how this actually is a traumatic experience. For some people, it's more literally traumatic, but I think for everyone worldwide, it's, you know, on some wavelength or another. So I'm just kind of like, what does trauma do to the brain, you know? And like, and I think we're sort of talking about it from different perspectives, but I'm interested in how, like, what the extreme tools are for extreme things like trauma, because I feel like we could learn from that as well when we're coming out of this, and also when we're trying to be conscious of like how to process it right now, because I feel like I haven't gotten to the acceptance stage yet. And maybe some of those trauma therapy tools would help people.
Thanks for the question, Sebastian. Trauma has a different impact on us depending on whether we have a predisposition. So if we've had earlier trauma, then it's going to have a much stronger effect on the body and brain. But essentially, we can go into a fight or flight or freeze response, depending on how we perceive it as a threat, as a survival threat, or a threat to our relationships, to our social relationships, or to our business survival, so economic survival. And it's very unhelpful, actually. It's incredibly debilitating to go into that kind of a state. It cuts off the thinking brain, which is what we rely on to get us out of these kind of problems. And of course, some people will really be in survival mode. They'll be, you know, their lung capacity will be threatened. So for them, it's going to be a very different kind of trauma to those of us who are trying to lead people through difficulty, or keep our families from, you know, becoming hostile because we're cooped up in the house. Yeah, I think so. There's going to be a whole spectrum of responses for people who are on the front line, even people who've worked in emergency rooms all their careers. They've been used to having resources. This is new. There are no resources. People are making it up. They're seeing horrific things. They're making decisions that they never expected to have to make. So there's no question that at that extreme end, there's going to be a lot of fallout, and society will be changed by this. For young people, it's going to have a high impact. There are kids who've been planning for the key moment of their whole life, which might be their finals at university, their A-levels, their GCSEs. These young people are learning that all of those huge plans and preparations they've made for months get wiped out overnight. They no longer are a thing. Now, that's going to have an impact on them for their whole lives and on the next generation, on their children. So the impact is immeasurable. We just will never know. I won't get old enough to know the impact that this is going to have on the world.
I hadn't thought about that. Well, maybe I'll ask a question that's in the, if you guys have you got the chat open, you can pop it out as a box so you can look at it. But I noticed something from Katie, who said, any views from the panel on uncertainty over a long period of time rather than just kind of, I guess, in the novelty phase of now? Is there, how does it change if we're in this for 2 months or 3 months, not just 4 or 5 weeks? Or 6 months even, I suppose, who knows?
I think it is going to be long term, and even when it's over, it's not over. It's going to be profoundly changing, just as Belinda's saying. So I think it will have an ongoing and tremendous impact on all of us. So I think, and the trauma stuff is a really helpful way of framing it. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma as well. We're talking about the trauma of this generation, but this will evoke and trigger all sorts of things that are already embedded in people. That's what you're saying, Belinda, as well, about the kind of predisposition. So a lot of stuff is coming up. And we're going to have to navigate everything. It's sort of a bit like Pandora's box, I think. Which, of course, the only thing that didn't come out of Pandora's box was hope, which is very connected with kindness, I think, and imagination and creativity. So it's going to pull on all of our resources. But I kind of just want to offer another perspective, which is that in a really large scale, we have been here before as the human species. In our short span, we haven't, but actually this happened 100 years ago with the Spanish flu.
Yeah, right.
Which was at the end of the First World War, and kind of quick young plug in a way. He had lots of premonitory dreams. I haven't got the word right. That helped prepare him for the fact that the world was going to change, and to begin to tune in to the deeper shifts and movements. Tectonic plates are shifting. So what I want to say is that the power of stories and myths to hold and contain us in something much bigger. And for us to know that's what the connections are about as well, I think, that we are not in this alone, and that we'll have to find new ways of belonging, new ways of telling our story that bring the past to the present, that allow it to carry us to the future. So a great kind of emphasis on creativity and imagination to get us through, as well as all just the being present and being kind. They all go together.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm gonna listen. I think I'd like one or two of the people asking questions to come on and speak, if they don't mind. Miriam, I'm gonna put you on the spot. I know you've asked your chat, but it's more fun if we get you to actually ask your question yourself. This is my sister Miriam, who's an amazing culture spotter and general investigator and clever individual, and my sister.
Thank you. I guess I'm just curious about your experience of when you've been with people who've gone through a trauma, and what are their needs when they come out of it? Are we, as a sort of society, going to want to be talking about it, digesting it, and so on, or would it be more sort of beneficial for us to set our sights on new goals and just to, I don't know, just sort of grow into this new person that we've become?
Sorry, I know I just spoke, but can I just come back to that and just the storytelling? It'd be great to hear from Belinda and Rebecca as well. But for me, when I'm working with people who have very deep trauma, the trauma never goes away. What shifts is the capacity of them psychologically to integrate it in a way that it becomes bearable, and in a way that it becomes part of their story rather than something awful and alien that doesn't fit with who they are. And so I think, and from that position, they're able to think of a future, rather than the position of trauma is that we get stuck in a repeating loop of the past. It's the same thing, it's the same thing. It gets cut off from the rest of life. So it becomes about integrating it, absorbing it, digesting it, and then we're able, I think, to evolve and adapt into the future. That's my experience anyway.
Rebecca or Belinda, do you want to add anything to that before we move on to the question?
I can. Rebecca, did you want to say something? Been quiet for a while. It's that wine, isn't it?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Wine, yeah, and my beer kicking in.
No one says you've been quiet for a while. It was really nice to hear.
Richard really nicely stated. I agree completely that telling the story is part of healing. What the current thinking is in trauma recovery is that there needs to be an emphasis on telling how we survived. So it's not the story for the sake of the story, not to bring up a re-triggered experience of how awful it was, but with a real emphasis on, and what we did to get through it. So I think if we take something away from tonight, it would be to encourage each other to tell stories in that spirit of, what helped us, how did kindness help, how did we help each other, how did communities come together, what were the strategies and the helpful things that we can take out of it. I think that's all I wanted to say.
And actually, can I jump in for a sec?
Yeah.
Just that's really interesting and useful from an organizational perspective as well. So, we create culture in organization a lot of the time through storytelling. And I think it's important for leaders right now to be thinking, what stories do we want to be telling on the other side of this about what kind of team we were, what kind of organization we were, who were we to each other, how did our culture change as a result of this in good ways, or how did we make sure that the best of us came through, like the best of who we are collectively came through this together, and to pick up on the points of how we'll come out of it and processing. I find, at a group or organizational or even societal level, I think that often when change happens rapidly and fairly unexpectedly, and so substantially, that in a lot of ways we really only start processing after the event, and we will need each other to do that.
Well, I was going to ask about that because there's a couple of questions, I think, from Andrew Smith and from it was Chris Bartley as well, and we'll come to Diego and Flora as well if we can. Two kind of related questions. One was, what should we be looking out for in people afterwards, in terms of when we come out of this thing? Is there something we should be watching out for in people around us to look after them? And maybe connected to that is, I guess, saying there'll be an expectation, I guess, that lots of us will rush back to corporate offices to go and sit there and commute every day, and that's going to be quite weird, isn't it? So I guess I'm talking about after this is over, what should we look out for, and what should we be aware of in terms of people coming back into teams again after a period of isolation?
Should I just keep chatting on that then? I'm sure that Richard and Belinda will have really important points to make on this, and particularly in terms of what to watch out for with people around us. Just on that note, I always think that particularly for people that we know, just to be mindful of significant changes to them acting out of character I think that we need to continue the kindness and have grace for one another, that we're just going to process this and be impacted by this on an ongoing basis. This isn't something that's happening to us and is going to end. The implications, practical, economic, psychological, will carry on with us for perhaps forever. And so, I think one thing to watch out for in terms of where I assume that we're looking out from a perspective of care, we're looking out, I'd say, to be looking out for, specific changes in how you'd expect people to be out working their character and their personality if you do know them. That's something that sends red flags for me. In terms of expectations of going back, I do have quite a lot of clients who are saying, well, I'm getting so much done because I'm not commuting, or I love not commuting, or I'm home for dinner now because I'm not commuting. And I've had other people saying, we have been told it's not possible for us to work at home, and look, here we are working from home. So I do think that this will actually change business. It will change business in the UK and around the world in terms of what we can do virtually. And it was a quick learning curve for a lot of people. A lot of people aren't comfortable with using all these different technologies we have, and now they are, and here they go, and off they zoom. And so I think it will change the way that we work. I think it will, it's just fast track flexible working. And I think as kind of business communities, we should embrace that. And so I'm so distracted by the libraries ordered by colour. Anyway, but yeah, I'd say going back, I think that leaders need to be respectful of people working out what works best for them, and let's take with us good new habits that we formed. So, a lot of client organizations are saying, we're connecting in ways we never did before. I'm finding out much more about people's families, their lives, their children, their dogs. We're having a quick team meeting for 15 minutes at the start of every day. Some people call it a huddle. And I've had organizations aspire to kind of having a huddle for years, and suddenly everyone's doing it and finding it useful. So I say we take the things that have worked well in this season as organizations and play them out in practice, not just revert back to type, but choose to learn, to be learning as leaders and as organizations, and move forward. And it will look different, and that's, in some ways, it's going to be a good thing.
Should we do another question? Has anyone got a question they want to ask, and they can come on video and kind of see a new face? It's always fun. There's Nicola, who I haven't met, but has joined late from Sweden, but could ask a question. Or Darlington, who knows Rebecca very well because he studies at LSE with her, can come and do it. Or Diego, who's dialing in from Colombia, I think, which is kind of cool. Or Flora, who I haven't met for a long time, but we made contact yesterday. Anyone want to ask a question? Because I know there's more questions to ask. Go on, someone. People don't like doing it today. Nicola, are you up?
Hello. I think am I unmuted? I can't tell if I am or not.
Hear you.
Super. Hello. I think I, for a long time, associated the words hope and confidence. I think if you have hope, then you need to build that into confidence, and then you really need to make change. So my bigger question is, listening to a lot of the thoughts here, at what point does the hope that we all are building somehow, that the world is going to be a better place after all of this, turn into the confidence that we really can make change?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm not keen to take it. Anyone else?
I think it has to start right now. I think we need to be conscious of the fact that we're using words like social distancing and isolation as positives. And so we have these people who are triggered by what's going on, becoming quite militant and irritable and potentially hostile to each other in the righteous cause of distancing. And that's something we can start with right away. Physical distancing, yes. Social distancing, yeah, absolutely not. I think in terms of other effects, and maybe this is something that Richard would want to speak to as well, is that there is no going back. We're not going back to old ways. Work is going to be different. Some people will decide that having simplified their lives and discovered that there are more meaningful things than you know, the commute and the 9 to 7 or whatever it is these days, isn't what it's all about. There's more congruent and meaningful lives that are available. They're experiencing them now. If that's a positive that comes out of this, that's great. 2 to 3 weeks is long enough to change habits. We know through brain scan studies that there are observable increases in grey matter forming within 2 to 6 weeks of starting a new practice. So the opportunity is here right now. So let's not wait until this is ended, if it ever ends, because, you know, people are talking about a second wave. Let's not hang around. Let's start making those changes right now.
Well, so I just come back to, because that absolutely really resonates. And I think, you know, I'm just really personally, I went out for a walk in my local area before we started, and I felt such grief for all the things that I'm not having at the minute. I had to get off the pavement to walk around someone, and I thought that just felt awful. And when I came home, I just really felt sad about not doing ordinary things like having coffee with friends, or eating together, or going to the cinema. And I thought that when those things start again, there will be such joy and gratitude, that we can do really ordinary things, and that we can embrace each other. And I'm conscious that the experience of joy and gratitude is a correlate of having lost, the experience of having lost them. Yeah. And that here we are, you know, kind of a little bit of a religious perspective, because those are the stories of survival. Whenever you said, you know, the story of how we survived, I thought, yes, I wrote it down and underlined it. We're just coming up to Passover, when kind of Jewish people are going to be remembering how they survived Egypt. We're coming up to the Christian feast of kind of Holy Week and Easter. And the profundity of reminding ourselves of these stories again and again, that after a death, there's a new life. And all of this started just at the beginning of the spring equinox. And probably we're going to come out of this initial phase around the summer solstice. So we're all listening to nature and the birds and stuff like that. So there's something immensely powerful, I need to say, about reconnecting with nature at the minute.
Agree.
The cyclical nature of things. So we can feel caught up and held by bigger processes, deeper wisdoms than our own strategizing. And part of that wisdom is becoming acquainted with the passing of things. Part of that wisdom is becoming reconciled to the loss of things. That's what kind of the art of detachment is about. Not so that we can disdain things, but actually so we can really have joy and gratitude for them when they're in our hands. And I think that really is how we can stay hopeful and move forward, not just with confidence, but with gratitude as well.
Wow, this is a much more powerful speech and talk than last week. Well done, guys. Now, I could carry on chatting for a while. I wonder whether we should draw it to a close with a kind of final thought from our speakers. And I don't know whether anyone was desperate to ask a question and was really terribly sad that they weren't able to get it in. Did anyone really want to ask something? Any other killer questions? If not, what I might do, and I guess
I have one, Leo, but I know that the time is important. So if you want to continue, I can keep my question to myself.
Leo is dialed in from a long way away. Go on, man.
Okay, so I only have one question, and it's regarding like the possibility of a hangover effect after the isolation. So I'm very curious to know about what will happen after, and I'm speaking about the immediate weeks after the like the whole liberation of everyone. Is that going to are we going to expect some spikes on maybe bad behavior or getting around the rules of social interaction? For example, just after the fall of the dictatorship in Chile and all the repression that happened with Chile, the months after saw an incredible spike on sexual behavior in young people. Everyone started to have, all young people started to have sex on a very menacing pace. So can we expect to have like a hangover effect or like a abstinence syndrome in people after the isolation phase? Sorry.
Putting you back on mute.
Please mute me, Leo. Mute me.
Go for it, Diego. I love that one. There are going to be a lot of Christmas babies, for sure.
I don't know about whether there's going to be some societal breakdown, maybe more so in the West than we've seen in China and other more authoritarian countries. What I'm really interested in is, and maybe Rebecca could answer to this, is whether organizations are going to have to find a new way to convince us that we need them.
Oh, that's a big question. To convince us that we need them.
Sorry, I just popped that one.
I don't know. Maybe Leo should speak to this. I'm sure you've got a lot more in terms of convincing.
No, without taking any risks with my employer, who could be reviewing this video. But I think we're discovering the ability to organise and not need a central physical location. I mean, the original office. I mean, someone else will know more about it than me, but an office is a very sort of industrial economy kind of view, isn't it, of how the world should operate? And we're discovering that we'd always known all along that at some point it was going to be a bit out of date, and I think we're discovering it now. So it has a big impact on how we work and where we work and who we work with. And we were discussing this morning on our team call, like the ability to be working with Los Angeles and Singapore. For some reason, this makes it so much easier in a way that it never seemed to be when we had to organize a conference call in the office or a video call. It's strange how it's, changed our perspective of that. But I'm not sure I did fair to Diego's amazing question. But I know for a fact that I did history as a university degree, so I'm a bit obsessed by history, but I know that during previous plagues, like, you did see very strange social behavior at the end of them. So there were, after the Black Death, there were these groups called flagellants that went around Europe kind of taking the blame on themselves and whipping themselves and going from town to town, sort of, dealing with the guilt of the evil. And at the same time, there were parties of people that would run from village to village, and they would bury the dead and get really drunk and steal all the stuff out of their houses. So it's kind of, there is quite potentially some quite as yet unknown and strange things to occur, I think. But I mean, I'm not the expert.
Well, so just on that though, the key story is Euripides the Bacchae, where the King Pentheus has basically banned fun, and a very strict moral regime. They've gone into lockdown, and he's visited. Therefore, the town is visited by the god Dionysus, Bacchus, who takes all of the townspeople off to party in the hills, and it actually turns incredibly violent, because that's the result of repression. And so I think Diego, you've really put your finger on something, and we need to think about what energies are going to be unleashed after this. So in a simple way, my partner said that we need to organise a party for when we come out of lockdown. Because if we don't, we might just, kind of break down instead of the alternative. But there is something about what's going to happen with all this pent up energy, and it needs to be creative.
So look, I think I'm conscious of time. I would love you to, all three of our wonderful speakers. So first of all, I'm going to thank Nick Bennett, who's in the top left of my screen, who once again has coordinated and helped us run this event. And without him, I always fear the kind of technical failure. So far, so good. And no porn bombing, which is a bit of a shame, but probably good for all of us. I'd like to thank my amazing selection of speakers. And honestly, that was the most incredible session. I think it's worth rewatching because there's so much in there that I didn't get time to write down. I'm not going to try and summarize it now, but I will send out an email with some help afterwards. But I wonder whether the three speakers, so Richard and Belinda and Rebecca, would mind doing a kind of parting thought for the gang before we disappear into the evening, and then we might come back again on a different theme next week. But what would you say? Okay, it's tough, I know, but could you give it a go?
Just so I don't have the last word, because I've talked a little bit, but I want to just speak up for ambivalence, and it was the point about going back to the office after this. When I work with people, one of the most significant moments of breakthrough is when they realize that they can have contradictory feelings about things, and that actually some people will be really feel great about going back to work, and others will really feel bad about leaving home, or a lot of us will have the same feelings simultaneously. And I think we need to stay with all of those conflicts, because the new normal will emerge from our capacity to synthesize them.
Like it. Belinda or Rebecca?
Yeah. So kind of parting thoughts about going forward, is that the...
Yeah, I guess, given the conversation of the evening.
Yeah. I would say be kind to yourselves. We talked about kindness. Someone else dropped on the chat about walking around and actually even just smiling at people that we wouldn't normally do, and that there is this kindness across the board in society and in organizational life and stuff. And I think, while I'm a big advocate in being intentional and being strategic, I think that we also just have to take each day right now as a refresh button and think, I always think, I always encourage my clients to think, okay, what kind of leader do I want to be? What kind of leader do I need to be? And the same goes for every part of our lives, right? So I'm trying to start my day thinking, okay, today, what kind of mum do I want to be? I've got 3 very loud, very small children. What kind of mum do I want to be today? What kind of wife do I want to be today? What kind of friend, colleague, leader do I want to be today? And just be kind to yourselves. We're, with all of the emotions and all of the challenge and all of the difficulty that we're facing, none of us are going to get that right. And I think that if we just do our best each day and accept the fact that we're not going to get it right, and tomorrow's a new day and we can try again and just do our best. So be kind, not just to other people, but kind to yourselves as well.
I love it. So Belinda, it falls to you.
Yeah, it's really a hard thing to follow, both Richard and Rebecca. Such beautiful ending words, really. I agree completely. Be kind to ourselves and be kind to each other. We have a choice, and if your choice is to be tolerant and kind, then make that choice, because there's enough going on. So greet random strangers. If you have to step out of someone's way into the road to give them the whole 2 meters, do it with a smile, do it with a wave, say hello, lessen the impact that this is having on people's bodies and minds. We do have that choice, and as Richard said, practice gratitude. There will be grief, but there's always the choice to reframe and find something positive And that will actually help us enormously.
Amazing, I've written it down. Thank you guys, both, all of you who spoke, anyone who asked a question. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them, and everyone who turned up to this event on a Wednesday evening and spent another hour or so on the screens. But I hope you'll agree with me that it was a pretty rewarding one. That was really, truly amazing. I'm really moved by it. So tell your friends, we'll share the video, stay in touch, write emails to each other, or get in touch on our social platforms. We can connect on various places, LinkedIn and beyond. But I'll speak to you soon. Thank you, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Good one. See ya.
Bye.